going?
Well, thanks, mate. Thanks for having me.
Hey, let's get stuck into your swimming. And I know you got into it because of asthma, like so many other swimmers out there. What sort of a young swimmer were you? Were you at the front of the line? Were you at the back of the line? Were you loud? Were you quiet? Where did you fit into those junior squads?
I was the brat at the back of the line pretty early on. I do remember. I think I've told this story quite a few times. I kind of went swimming begrudgingly. I never really enjoyed it when I was younger, and I used to. I think it was actually broke my leg at a swimming carnival in year 2. Funny enough, that was my first memory of swimming. And then around, I think up to year 3 or year 4, I'd always used to. My mum would drop me off at the swimming pool, and she'd go off and go shopping while I was swimming. And I used to walk in, sort of wave goodbye to her, and as I knew she'd be gone, I'd just walk back out again and sit in a tree and just throw gum nuts or something and just sort of kill some time until she came back. And I think looking back on it was pretty stupid, because I'd get back in the car and my hair would still be dry. So I think it didn't take her long to figure out what I was doing. And one day she did a circle around the block and came back, and I was sitting in my favourite tree that had a little dip in it, which was perfect for my small bum. And I'll never forget the look on her face as she was driving towards me and looking at me sitting in a tree when I was supposed to be in the pool. So from that point on, she was in there every day and making sure I actually got in the pool. And even then, I was piss farting at the back of the lane, pretending my kickboard was a boogie board and not really taking it seriously, doing what I needed to do and no more. And I think that, probably stands out as a sprinter mentality in general. So it's probably the writing was on the wall back then that I didn't want to do any more than I needed to, and you can't do any less than a 50. So, from that point on, I didn't really take it seriously until I think it was 94, year 4. I remember my coach at the time just said, "Why don't you actually just give it a crack and try and pass someone in front of you?" And I never thought about that, so I gave it a crack, and I actually swam past the guy that I used to muck around with, and we ended up getting a bit of a fight, because as I was passing him, he pulled my leg back, and then I pushed me underwater, and I pushed him, and the coach pulled both of us aside and told him to let me go in front. And then by the end of that week, I was kind of leading the lane, and then I went up a level, and it just sort of progressed from there. And I think I never saw the results of actually putting in effort and getting a result out of it. And I think from that point, I started to get addicted to that sense of satisfaction when you finished a hard set, or you did something that you'd never done before in the pool. And I guess that's what I've been addicted to ever since, is that progression and always getting better at what you do. And that's kind of where I can definitely pinpoint that's where it all started.
How much of an inspiration was 1998 World Champs in Perth? Because, I mean, I'm around the same age as you, so obviously I was watching from home, but it was over in your state. You only have to look back. Grant Hackett was there. I remember hearing on the coverage, Ian Thorpe winning, world champion at 15. Clemmy was there. Susie, you lived there. How motivating was that to a young Eamon coming through?
Yeah, extremely motivating. I was there. I think my mum let me take a couple of days off school, during that time, so I could go and watch. So I was there nearly every day, heats and finals, I think, watching it. And I was sitting in front of Clemmy's dad a couple of the days, and I was too embarrassed to give my hat and ask for a signature. But my mum went up and gave my hat to Clemmy's dad. And it got handed back to me 2 days later, signed exactly where I asked for it to be signed. And it was a pretty special thing. And I think it was back in those days where you wanted to get signatures of everyone. And I was running around getting this hat signed. And the calibre of swimmers back then was just amazing. And obviously the Aussies had an amazing meet, obviously heading into Sydney for 2 years later. And certainly was still a little bit blurry that whole week. But just being the age I was, I think I was... what was I? Probably like 14, I think.
I was going to guess. I just didn't want to get it wrong. I thought I'd leave it.
Thereabouts. But yeah, it was just incredible. Definitely motivating. And at that time in my career, it's sort of, I wasn't motivated to be in that position. I think I was just enjoying my training and didn't really think anything of it. And was just just excited by the sport in general, and I think it probably helped push me along, but not as not from a point of wanting to be there, just from the point that I just loved watching it and competing at that time.
Hey, one thing going through your career that's it's definite is there's a mental toughness to what you've had to endure and still overcome. The next 4 years you battle injuries, which you previously had as well. You missed 2005 World Champs, but you still always managed to fight back to your best. I mean, you went on Com Games in Melbourne, broke some long-standing Australian records. For all the young swimmers out there listening to the podcast, talk to me about that mindset during those setbacks with injuries, because you seem to be someone that always bounced back and yes, physically, but more mentally. How did you sort of navigate those?
I think, for one, I worked a lot with a sports psychologist through WACE, and that was something that was always available to us. And it's just something that was always part of my career and talking about things and, but I certainly was and still am an emotional person, I guess. I'm extremely competitive. I do have my down days, when things don't go to plan and when things don't go well. And I guess my process was always, when I was injured, I'd go pretty dark and pretty down for a few days. And I'd just get to a point where I'd just snap myself out of it and almost hit the reset button. So it was always about, enough. I guess the point where I'd be sitting at home and I'd sleep in from training, and I'd go, okay, enough's enough. What do I need to do? And I'd kind of map out. I'd look at what I can't do. Obviously strike that off your week, but then also look at what I could do.
Yeah.
And I guess that's something I had to develop pretty early in my career. When I had chronic shoulder problems from 15. I'd had 2 hip surgeries before the Olympics in 2004. And multiple other injuries along the way. So for me, it was I either had to quit and, due to injuries, or find a way to be able to still get the same results and compete at that level. And for me, it was always finding a different way to train. I think being a sprinter and developing into a sprinter, and my training regime, I guess at the time was probably not groundbreaking, but certainly something that not a lot of people did, or did successfully, I guess, was training different. And I think middle distance swimmers historically, and even back to the late 90s, early 90s, everyone did the same training, and they just happened to swim different races.
Yeah.
And you talk about a lot to a lot of the coaches, and you look at where it is now, and it's so different. And I don't think we're on the cutting edge of it, but I think we did it at the right time in my career, that I was able to get through those injuries because of the way I was training. It was more about, for me, it was power to weight ratio. And when I had my hip surgeries, I guess that was the thing that really I tried to change was, okay, my hips are out of action. I wasn't a great kicker anyway, and I never have been. I've got teeny tiny legs that don't have many muscles. Whether that was due to the hip surgeries and not being able to really get the strength of my legs back then, but what I did was focus on my upper body strength. So after those hip surgeries, I was back in the pool after a week, but I had my legs strapped together. I had a pool buoy on and straps around my legs, and I just swim a lap at a time. Touch the wall, turn around and swim back again, and just do that for an hour or two, just to be in the water. But through that period, it was obviously when your hips are more buoyant with a pool buoy in, you're able to really put on some big paddles. You can really feel the water. And for me, it was all about developing my stroke, my technique, and my underwater catch. And in the gym, pairing that with upper body strength. And I went from, as a kid, barely being able to do 10 chin-ups in a row to be able to do, I think towards the end, I worked on trying to do as many chin-ups as strokes as fast as I could. So I think I used to do 38 strokes in my 50 free. So I tried to get 38 chin-ups done as quick as I could and try and get that time down. And, I think my best was 67.5 kilos for one max chin-up when I was weighing 75. So it was nearly, my power to weight ratio was something that really took off from a young age, because I was forced to to get that strength when my legs weren't working that well and I wasn't able to train them. So I think when that started to work, it was always, a positive sign that the things I'd worked on had delivered results. And I think just from a young age, I had the mentality of, well, I was quite often injured before a major meet. It was just part of my process, I guess. And from a young age, we just always said, well, we've got nothing to lose, let's just race. And I managed to have great races off the back of injuries, off the back of less training. And it just gave me that confidence that I could get up and race whenever I wanted to from a young age, and that sort of carried forward. So I think it was that mentality from a young age of always trying to find a plan B to still get some training in, but also to work on your weaknesses when there was an injury or some sort of setback. And that sort of carried forward with me through my whole career. No matter what injury I had, I was always finding a way to improve another weakness that I could work on, as opposed to just sitting at home and feeling sorry for myself.
Now, mate, anyone that remembers Beijing in terms of that 100 freestyle, remember that sort of back and forth you had with that world record. You broke it first in the lead off in the relay, 47.24. Alain Bernard comes out in the semi-final, goes 47.2. Then you walk out in your semi and casually just go 47.05. So you two are playing tennis. Still to this day, those are some of the fastest times in history. Before we go to that final, talk to me about that battle. Was that something you were conscious of, or were you just in your own lane when you walked out there?
In the lead up, yeah, definitely in my own headspace. I do remember purposely not looking at his semi-final. I think the tendency to watch other people's races in the marshalling area is always can either work for you, or it can, depending on what type of person you are.
Yeah.
And I remember I purposely sat in the corner and just looked at the wall and tried to just think about what I was doing. I didn't want to know what he was swimming at the time. And I heard the crowd cheer pretty loud, so I kind of assumed he did a pretty good time. Mm-hmm. But I walked out there not knowing that he'd broken my world record that I set a couple of days before, and was just able to focus on my race completely. So, and then, fast forward to the final, I did the opposite of that, and it didn't work for me. So it kind of shows the two different ways of thinking about things and the effects it can have.
Well, let's get to when it went right for you. What did go so right in that 47.05, do you think?
I just was completely confident in myself. I executed my race plan. I didn't think about anyone else, didn't look at anyone else, even though there's obviously 7 other people in that race. And I was swimming next to Peter Van and Hoogenband, I think, and a few other guys. And yeah, I just was just in my lane, had the blinkers on, that nothing else came into it. I think that's, I didn't try. It was probably one of the easiest races I've ever swum. And that's kind of what I refer to when I say, if you try too hard, especially in sprinting, you can go slower. It gets to the point where you need to rely on your technique and your power. And I think I did exactly that. It was the easiest race I've ever swum, and it looked like the easiest race I've ever swum. Yeah. So I think that's where everything went right.
The flip side of that, the final, you mentioned it. Well, where did it slightly go wrong in there?
Well, yeah, in the lead up to that, I think that race went so well. I knew I had more in the tank, and I felt like I did. I think the error we did was we then started talking about Alain Bernard for the final, as opposed to talking about what I needed to do to swim my fastest race. So that final, as far as I'm concerned, was kind of over before it even started. From our mentality of assuming that I could swim my race based on where Alain was going to be, and I decided that I was going to try and save some energy for that second 50 and still get out in front of him by about, a quarter of a body, half a body length. So I was pacing myself off him, which, as history shows you, he turned in front of me as opposed to me turning in front of him. So I should have got out there and do what I did best, which was get out fast and hold on. So my race plan was out the window, panic set in, I started trying harder. And when you do that, you don't necessarily go faster. So, it was kind of rookie mistake 101 on the world's biggest stage, when that's kind of what you say to an age grouper, is just focus on your own race. And as a 24-year-old, after breaking world record and thinking that I was pretty confident, and probably a bit too confident. I focused on someone else and didn't swim a terrible race, but it was 0.1 of a second off where I needed to be, 0.2 even, and that made all the difference.
So instead of being nice and easy, you were trying to rip and a tear, and so we're just not holding.
Yeah, I do remember that, and that's the biggest difference between those two races for me. Is one felt extremely easy and was 0.2 quicker. The other one was a battle the whole way, and it was lucky I went that fast. The way I swam that race. So it's a silver medal is not something to scoff at, and I think at the time, it's, and even to this day, I'm more disappointed that I took that mentality into that race and didn't swim the way I should have. That's more what's disappointing for me, is that opportunity was lost from one simple decision. Coming second, I'm still very proud of. It's certainly tainted by that decision that I made, but at the same time, if you ask the kid when he was 12, 14, when he gave up hockey and decided to keep swimming, if you had said I was going to win an Olympic silver medal, I would have laughed. So yeah. I guess that's the hard thing to put into perspective, is that when you're in that moment, it's expectations, and what you want is all you think about. But when I think about the journey I've had over my years and the people I met and my career, it's still, when we were talking about before, now you've got 2 kids, and in real life, as we call it, it's not retirement. You actually just get into real life, something that you do for a lot longer of your lifespan as opposed to maybe a 10-year career. Puts things in perspective that I wish I also had back in the day, is that a bad race doesn't mean much, and you shouldn't be nervous, because there's always another opportunity to swim fast. And at the end of the day, it is sport. It's supposed to be fun and competitive, and I think it's something that you don't really learn until you do retire from swimming, is that you probably wish you had taken it a bit more casually and just enjoyed it for what it was, and not think the world's going to end if you have a bad race.
Hey, 2012, I think you've been far enough removed now from being a swimmer that I can ask this question without getting you into too much trouble. The backlash that you guys copped following London from the media, from the Australian public, I think everyone wanted to jump on the bandwagon, whether they actually knew what was going on or not. They decided they were going to jump on. Was it fair, do you think, or was it a bit unwarranted?
From a personal perspective, I thought it was unfair. I think there was certainly, it's definitely not like the media to make a story out of something that is there, but not necessarily as big as what it was. And I think, the performance of the swim team in general wasn't great in 2012. The expected goals that we were supposed to have didn't happen, and I think a lot of people were expecting it. And that's probably the hardest thing with swimming in general in Australia, is that every 4 years we're the best of what we do in the world, and people rely on the swim team at the Olympics to get a lot of the gold medals. In between that, there's not much press around it, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're winning world championships or anything. It's not, oh guys, there's the Pan Pacific Championship trials on this month in August, and we're going to be all about it. It is very cyclical in the Olympic cycles for us, and the coverage we get as athletes, and that's sort of what makes it a lower paying sport. We're not on TV every weekend competing, and big TV rights, and that's something that I think swimmers have always been pretty happy with, and we do it because we love it. So I guess, it was. I found it disappointing. I found it disappointing for a few different reasons. Is that the whole toxic stuff, I think, was taken out of context. I think there was a lot of reasons that the swim team didn't do well. It from my point of view, it comes from the top. It's not one person on the teams can't affect how a whole team swims. It's that the leadership probably wasn't there in a lot of different avenues, to be honest. And there are a few things that probably happened that people got away with that other people on the team weren't happy with, and there was a disconnect. I think as far as the team culture was, and teams I've been on in the past, it was nothing like 2004, 2008. There just wasn't that leadership or camaraderie that we'd had in previous years. So it was disappointing, to say the least.
Swimming,
Not to
right?
say that it was the right, what obviously we did. We're not saying it's the right thing to do, but, it's certainly not condoning that sort of behaviour. But at the same time, it was 3 weeks out from the Olympics. We're in bed by 10 p.m. We're up training the next morning. I don't think that's something that makes a whole swim team swim badly 3 weeks at an Olympics. Yeah. So it's kind of, not to stir things up, that's as much as I'll probably. There's a lot more to it as well, which I won't say. But from my perspective, it was sort of a shame for the media and the Australian media in general to pump our tyres up as a 4x1 and say we're the weapons of mass destruction and jump on Maggie's and James Roberts' back and put that much pressure on them and say we're just going to win, and there's no doubt about it, I think, and then turn around when you don't win and tear shreds off you. It's one of those things that definitely pretty hard to deal with. I would have hated to be in Maggie's position and us as a team. It certainly put a target on our back as to the ones that didn't perform. And I guess personally for me, I felt like I swam a good race and as good as I could at that time. And it was pretty one of those stories that you can kind of show what the media is really truly capable of when they want to be.
Mate, we've mentioned Celebrity MasterChef a few times. Has food and cooking always been a passion of yours? And the second question to that is, in that competition, how much of the sprinter came out in you and just wanting that win?
Cooking was always a passion for me. It started at school. I loved home economics because you could always eat during class, and I used to be quite a fussy eater growing up. So it was I'd have nachos with cheese only and not have salsa and anything else on top of it. I wouldn't try anything new because I didn't want a bar of it. And I think once I started cooking at school, I went from just saying no to everything to when you actually cook them, you realise what goes in it. So I think the first dish we cooked was beef stroganoff, which to an immature 12-year-old, you think it looks a little bit like diarrhea. Mm-hmm. So I was always quite hesitant to try that. And then you realise it's beef stock and cream and beef, and there's stuff in there that individually you quite like it. And then I went from being the fussiest eater to now, if I go out for dinner, I will try something I've never had before because I enjoy that exploring stuff now and trying things and making up my mind, as opposed to when I was younger, my mind was already made up. And that just sort of blossomed into that next step of my swimming career, is taking a lot more responsibility for what I put in my body. I started learning, that scrambled eggs, if you're eating out, is full of cream and butter. Is that the smartest thing to have when you're trying to maintain a certain weight? How much sugar's in things, and that's where I started looking into my food a lot more and taking a lot more responsibility, and that's when my body sort of changed from a skinny and chubby sort of 13-year-old to when I got to 18. I was pretty lean and mean and still skinny, but a lot leaner and a lot more focused on what I was putting into my body. And then that just transitioned into me wanting to get into hospitality and open a cafe because I enjoyed cooking. And the MasterChef opportunity came from that, and my managers knowing that I enjoyed cooking and wanted to open a cafe, and they saw that as a good platform to put my passions in place. And it came on the back of pulling out of the 2009 World Champs when I had a virus. And it was kind of the right opportunity at the right time, that I had some time off and I could put some passion into that and try and sort of hit the reset button mentally.
You've
then part B of that one, yes,
yep.
The competitive side of me came out. I practiced for months leading into that. I had people over for dinner every Friday, Saturday night. I was cooking. The signature dish we had to do in our first episode, I probably cooked about 30 times to make sure that I memorized the recipe and I'd got it right and I knew how to do it. I was pretty full on through that period.
Mate, finally, what do you want your legacy to be in the sport? I mean, some people are not phased on this. Some people don't even think about the question. And I know Grant the other day said he'd never actually thought about it. That wasn't something that come across his mind. If I say to, someone, mention your name, Eamon Sullivan, how do you want to be remembered as an athlete and as a swimmer?
Oh, probably the same as Grant. I guess I never really thought about that, but I guess um, probably just persistent. I
Yeah.
think I was thinking of talking about someone else. I was doing a talk for someone else in a couple of weeks, and we were talking about the theme of what I was going to talk about, and it really is just persistence and perseverance. I was always, I was persistent. I just didn't give up. And I guess that's the only thing that I like to think of myself as in general. So I think if that's doesn't seem like a great word to be thought of, but at the same time, it's kind of that was the persistence in injuries and stuff, and what I got through is kind of how I got to where I got to, and persevering, and yeah, I guess if that is acceptable.
Mate, it's anything you say is acceptable, mate. So it's all good. Now, I want to thank you very much for coming on the podcast. I know how busy you are. As I said, we've been trying to get this together for a while, and I know you're a busy man, and I've been busy too with getting other interviews set up. So thank you very much. It's been a privilege,
My
to
pleasure.
go through your career. And I think you're a champion in and out of the pool, mate. And I think sometimes you don't get enough credit for what you did for swimming here in Australia, and definitely the sprinters and inspiring that next generation. I think most definitely you're one of the toughest, most determined. I think determined is probably the word I'd use for you in terms of,
Yeah.
not letting things get in the way of where you wanted to go. And as I said to you before, mate, I don't think that's an easy thing. I think that's definitely, sets you apart from everyone else. But, until we chat again next time, mate, thank you very much for coming on Off the Block Swimming podcast.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Today's episode of Off the Block Swimming podcast is proudly brought to you by Arena Australia and Arena NZ.